Chapter 2 is about teamwork and working with a team. So, that of course begs the question, what is a team? A team is simply a unit of two or more people, obviously an individual cannot be a team because that's an individual, who share a mission and share a common goal. That doesn't mean it could be a short project, it could be a team that's permanent, or anything in between. If I ask two people to write a speech for me, or I ask two people to write a lesson for me, or anything like that, all of that is considered a team, at least for this purpose. You could be part of 12 different teams at the same time. There's no inherent limitation. There are problem-solving teams that are trying to resolve specific issues. There are task forces that are more intense than individual problem-solving teams. They really are also problem-solving teams, but they're maybe put together for a month or a year to try to solve a major issue and to try to look at it many different ways and maybe meet several different times. Then there are committees which are more like permanent teams. And they don't have to be permanent in terms of always, but they're fixtures in the company. The hiring committee, the human relations committee, the committee to ensure that the advertising of the company is appropriate and ethical. These are examples of committees. These are just all different examples of teams. What do teams do rather than having one person do each job? Well, they increase information and knowledge. It's a lot easier to do research when you have 3 or 4 people researching the same thing. They increase the diversity of views rather than having one person's judgment be the only thing that filters the effectiveness of the team. Increase acceptance of a solution, which essentially means that if you can get 4 people or 5 people to agree to something, there's more confidence that the company can have in it rather than it being the judgment and the result of the work product of one person. There are some disadvantages of teams. Groupthink. You know what groupthink means? Groupthink means because the other people think that it's true, then other people in the team go along with it. This is a common psychological phenomenon where it's been proven that if you have 10 people who are asked a question and the first 5 people say the answer is A, then people 6 through 10 are more likely to say the answer is A, even if they don't think the answer is A. Even if they know that the answer is B, they're actually very often likely to say A because if other people in the group, it's kind of like a jury. You know, if a jury, you got to get 12 people to agree on something in many cases, and you'd think, how can you get 12 people to agree on anything? You can hardly get 12 people on the street to agree on, what day it is, let alone something as important as whether somebody's guilty or innocent. But it works because very often people cave into peer pressure, and even if they're not 100% sure what the answer is. So that's a problem of teams because what happens is when you have a team, are you really getting 5 different diverse viewpoints or are you getting 2 different diverse viewpoints and the others just kind of fall in line? It's something you got to watch for. Not a reason not to use teams, but it's something you have to watch for. Are there hidden agendas on the members of the teams? What's the cost? Now the cost is not just in, team meetings and the cost of not just in terms of, meals for team meetings or anything like that, but costs are in time. Rather than having one person in your company whom you're paying a salary research something, you're having 4 people do it. That's, 4 times the salary. Now, hopefully they're not spending 4 times the amount of overall time, but there's still a cost involved of having a team work on something rather than an individual work on something. It's something you got to think about. Again, these are not reasons not to use teams, but they're reasons to be careful. And some things are not, the teams aren't necessary. Where teams aren't necessary and where it's possible for one person to do it just as effectively, it may be a better idea not to have teams. What defines effective teams? They know what they're there for. Their purpose is to research a particular area, not to determine what is wrong with the entire company. Open and honest communication. Can the team members communicate with each other properly? If you have people on different levels, maybe it's harder for have one person who's the CEO and one person who's just an assembly line worker on the same team. It might not be that easy to really get a diversity of viewpoints. Consensus-based decision making. Do they make a decision based on, okay, I'm the boss of the committee, I'm the boss of the team, and I'm making the decision? Or do they establish a decision only once there's a consensus, or at least close to a consensus? Doesn't mean everybody has to agree, but at least you should have a clear majority of the team that agrees on something. And by the way, once a clear majority of the team agrees on something, a characteristic of a good team is that the other members, once they've put forth their arguments and quote-unquote lost their arguments, they now work for the benefit benefit of the solution. They're considering solution A and solution B, and the team votes 9-2 to implement solution A. Well, the other two members hopefully will say, okay, we gave it our shot. The other side won the day. Now we're going to contribute as much as possible to the implementation of solution A. There are obviously some of the things that determine whether a team is going to be successful. Okay, what are the roles? What are the phase? What is the conflict resolution? In other words, if people disagree, how are we going to settle the disagreements? What are the roles going to be? Is one person going to be a team leader? Is one person's responsibility going to be to make sure that the team is on the right track? These are all things that are important. Here are some examples of of team roles that could help or team roles that can hurt. Self-oriented roles, things that are bad things, and these are things that happen. These are things that have to be watched for and prevented, if at all possible. The controlling team member who tries to control everybody else. The withdrawing team member who says, listen, I can't deal with this team. I can't work with them. I'll be a member of the team, but I'll just sit there and I won't say anything. Well, then that person is useless. You might as well have that person go lick stamps or stuff envelopes because that person isn't helping the team. Attention seeking. Look, I've done the best. I deserve the most credit. You don't want, to the extent, it's human nature to have that sort of thing, but you want to try to minimize it in order to improve the effectiveness of the team, and diverting the person who diverts the discussion to something that's not relevant to the team's mission. Somebody who doesn't want to discuss the team's purpose, which is how to market this product, instead wants to discuss why management should give everybody a raise. That has nothing to do with the mission. So you want to try to avoid these things. And of course, what you want is these functional roles, these good roles. You want encouraging, you want harmonizing, trying to make sure everybody thinks similarly on a particular. Compromising. Very, very important. Team members, you're going to have people with different diversities of viewpoints, and that's fine. That's good. That's a good element. But you also want, you want to try to harmonize the viewpoints of the team members. And of course, task-oriented roles means, okay, what is the team doing to further the mission of this particular team? Getting the team started, somebody's got to initiate or give an idea. There has to be give and take in terms of information. There has to be coordination. People have to be working on things in the appropriate order and working on things in the way that helps to further the team's objective. And there has to be a set of procedures. Okay, when are we going to meet? Who's going to set forth the ideas? Who's going to break ties? Who's going to bring our suggestions to management? There need to be roles in a team. If it's just a 2 or 3 person team, may not be necessary. If it's a 7 or 8 person team, you're probably going to have team roles. Here are some examples of how a team can grow. It starts with orientation, where you need to sit around at the committee desk and say, okay, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. Hi, my name is Joe, my name is Jane, etc. Conflict. Okay. There is going to be conflict in a team. There is going to be differences of opinion. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that, as long as you can all share your ideas and views by brainstorming, by establishing, which means everybody establishes their viewpoint and everybody tries to give ideas until you come, hopefully, in the end, to an emergence, which means a consensus, which means that, okay, this is the idea that the team is going to do, and then reinforcement, which is establishing plans to make sure that everybody's on board, and of course, execution of whatever ideas are established. How can conflicts be resolved? Well, may not always be 100% possible, but these are some of the things that can resolve conflicts. Proactive behavior, making sure that in advance of any possible conflict, we look at ways in which to resolve conflicts. Communication, openness, research. In other words, if you're able to establish why your belief system is what it is, you're more likely to convince people. Fair play, flexibility, all things that are important in resolving conflicts. How does one overcome resistance? Well, active listening, again, means making sure that the person who's communicating is comfortable that his or her ideas are being considered. Ask questions, make sure that everybody else is comfortable asking questions, expressing interests in everybody's opinions and everybody's thoughts on the matter, and of course trying to collaborate. How does one collaborate? Okay, well, selecting the collaborators, but most importantly, agreeing on the project goals. Once everybody has to be on the same page. If people are on different pages in terms of what the team's goals are, if people don't understand, okay, this team's goal is to make a recommendation to management of whether we should launch a Google advertising campaign or a Facebook advertising campaign or whether we should hire a new person or something to that effect, if people don't understand that is our mission, they're not going to be able to communicate and work together effectively. But of course, also to clarify the individual responsibilities. One person's main responsibility is to research how other campaigns have done at this company. Another person's responsibilities are to try to look at other companies, do research of how other companies have done this, etc. Establishing a clear process. Avoid composing as a group, which means individuals need to be responsible for individual tasks. If you're doing research on something, you can't have 3 people researching one particular minute area. It's going to cause conflict, and it's not necessary. It's great to have teamwork, but on the other hand, if a job is a small job, it's better to have one person do it and bring the results to the team. You don't want to have 3 different people duplicating each other's work, and then they disagree with how it's being done, and that just leads to conflict and waste of resources and wasteful meetings and messes, etc. Then there's collaborative writing. Collaborative writing is a way to share a task of research or writing. You can use something that lives in the cloud, like Google Docs is what many people use, where there's a document that many people have access to, and one person can write it, other people can edit it. There's a feature in Microsoft Word called track changes, where you can every change you make to something, other people can see it, and the project leader or the team leader can review and approve it if necessary. There are shared online workspaces. Again, these are all things we're not going to focus on it in detail here, but these are all things to keep in mind. Basically, it's something that really took hold about 10 years ago or so called cloud computing, and cloud computing is the idea of rather than something living on your particular hard drive, something lives in the quote-unquote cloud, a Dropbox folder, a Google Sheets, a Google Doc, something that many people can access and many people can edit. It's a little bit of an easier way to do a collaborative job rather than having everybody do the same, reproduce the same thing and then try to make sure it's all consistent. You have one person do it, a second person review it and suggest changes, a third person review it and suggest changes, and of course you have to have one person who has the ultimate responsibility of how it looks. There are some examples over here. Spaces is one example. Okay, again, these are just different examples of shared workspaces. You can figure out on your own, or you can ask somebody who works for your company how you do it. Either way, there are many different possibilities of establishing it, of being effective in this way. Okay, feedback is extremely important. Okay, somebody does something, you disagree, or this is your underling, and how do you tell your underling to redo something? Here are some suggestions on how to give good feedback. Think through your suggested changes. Don't just go willy-nilly saying I do this differently, I do that differently. You may change things, but if you're going to criticize somebody else's work, think carefully. Is it the sort of thing that's just stylistic? If you're the supervisor, you're entitled to have your style be the thing that carries the day, but you don't want to necessarily criticize somebody just for doing something that's not your style if it's perfectly correct or just as good. Alternatively, discuss improvements rather than flaws. Your sentence was bad as opposed to your sentence can be improved by doing this. Focus on controllable behavior. In other words, if it's something that the person can't correct anyway due to some defect in knowledge or due to some technological defect or whatever it is, then there's really no point in criticizing. The writer may not have control over every variable. You only try to focus on what the person that you're dealing with can control. Criticizing him for something that he can't control is kind of pointless and just makes him feel bad, but doesn't actually help. Be specific. This is something I wish I could tell everybody. This is when you're talking about writing an essay, when you're talking about anything. If you have a question, be as specific as possible. I don't get this. It's a very, very poor way to give feedback because you're not telling the reader what it is you don't get. I don't like the work. Not it's useless. It's useless and it's aggravating because the person's saying, oh, okay, now I'm deficient in some way, but I don't know how I was deficient. So what's the point? Just redo it. It may be a little bit easier for you to give somebody else feedback or to give somebody else a message like that because but it's lazy. Asking a non-specific question or giving non-specific feedback is just lazy because what you're doing is you're making things easier for yourself by not trying to clarify in your mind what you want differently without actually, and this applies to asking questions as well. You ask somebody a question, try to be as specific as possible rather than saying, can you explain this to me? Well, what about it is it that you don't understand? If it's just that you don't understand what I wrote, well, okay, read it again. If there's something specific about what I wrote that I can clarify for you, okay, but tell me what it is about what I wrote that I can help clarify. Otherwise, just saying I don't understand, can you explain it to me again? It's useless. It's not polite. it's not a very effective way of doing things. Keep feedback impersonal. This paragraph could be improved in this way, rather than you did a bad job on this paragraph, or you show lack of skills in this paragraph. And that's kind of what people say when they're angry, but it's not very effective. Be understanding, or verify that the person understands the message. Time your feedback carefully. If it's 5 minutes before the deadline, there's probably no point in saying, this should be redone because it's not getting redone anyway. Give the person adequate time before you expect to do it. If you're just going to make the changes at the last second, you may later on afterwards say, I made these changes based on XYZ, but it's probably a better idea from a work perspective just to make your changes and not actually give feedback if the person is going to be able to do anything about it anyway. Highlight any limitations that you may have, for example, and again, I'm spending a lot of time on this one because I think these are critical. I think these are so important in the academic world and in the business world. Highlight any limitations. You might say something like, I haven't had a chance to look at this very carefully, but here are my general suggestions. Then you're kind of conceding that, listen, I don't know, that I might not be 100% right. Maybe your work is better than I'm giving you credit for. Maybe this feedback or these limitations are the product of being too quick about it, and that's just being honest. You're giving feedback, but you're admitting that your feedback is not infallible. So let the writer know and say, okay, I'm doing my best to give you feedback, but just realize this feedback might not be the be all, end all. Okay, preparing for meetings. Meetings can be fantastic, can be a great way to do teamwork, or they could be a waste of time. And waste of time is either if they're unnecessary, have people there that don't need to be there and have no purpose there, or that are not really just if there's a weekly meeting with sometimes teams do that. We have a weekly meeting as an update, and that's great, but still there should be an agenda. There should be a purpose for a meeting. You shouldn't just call a meeting and say, okay, this is our weekly meeting, so we're just going to sit around the table and talk. If there's really nothing to talk about, maybe skip the meeting. And if there is a weekly meeting, if you sit down, if you're running the meeting, if you sit down for 20 minutes before the meeting or at some point and think about, okay, what can we accomplish by this meeting, you'll usually find that you can actually make meetings productive. Even if we're only meeting because it's Monday at 3 and we meet every Monday at 3, still you can probably figure out things that are that would make the meeting more productive. Define your purpose. What's the purpose of the meeting? Who's coming to the meeting? Why is it important that this person come to the meeting? Does this person need to know what's said in the meeting, or is it just wasting the person's time? Choosing time and venue when people can be there and people can be attentive. You don't want to necessarily have meetings late Friday afternoons unless you want people staring at their phones or watches and thinking about the weekend. Set the agenda for the meeting. That's important. Okay, what are we going to do? Rather than just believe me, I've been in meetings where you just sit around the table and nobody really knows what's being discussed. It's a waste of time. If you can, you don't always have to do this, but if you can, if you're the meeting leader, type out an agenda. Okay, we're going to deal with 7 points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And each point maybe has some sub-points. Hand it out to everybody, and we're going one after another. It doesn't mean that the agenda won't be changed in midstream. It doesn't mean that people won't think of other things in the middle that might sidetrack or deal with other issues that come up. That's fine, but at least you have structure. And having structure is extremely important. Keep the discussion on track, follow the agreed upon rules, encourage people to participate, all things that make meetings more productive. Participate actively. Especially if you're the meeting leader, somebody has an idea, say, okay, what does everybody else think of that idea? Or, that idea isn't really practical right now because of X, Y, Z, and then move on. It doesn't mean you have to get a consensus for everything. If somebody says, I think we should launch this kind of campaign, you say, thank you very much for the idea. Right now we don't have that budget, for the budget for that kind of campaign, and so let's move on to the next issue. But thank you very much for the idea, something to that effect. Use mobile devices respectfully. You really don't want to. It's very rude to to take calls in the middle of meetings. And listen, if it's an emergency, it's an emergency. But if you're sitting there and your friend texts you that the score in the ball game, and you text your friend back what the score, oh wow, the team is losing or the team is winning, it's rude. And doesn't mean people don't do it, but it's not a good idea to do it in a business meeting. Using mobile devices respectfully means silencing your phones. Not, again, you may put it on vibrate, and if it's okay if you get a call during a meeting or a text during the meeting to quickly take a glance at it to make sure it's not an emergency. That's usually acceptable. And if it is an emergency, a family member's sick, or or your boss is calling you in for something for a deadline, okay, listen, you got to take it. You got to take it. That's okay. But just to to read and respond to every text you get during a meeting, that's disrespectful, and it's not nice. Also. Okay, here's an example of a meeting agenda. I don't know if I'd call this typical. This is probably a little bit more more restrictive than typical. We're going to spend 10 minutes on this. We're going to spend 20 minutes on that. We're going to spend 45 minutes on that. It doesn't have to be that specific. Usually, when I'm in meetings, I don't set agendas that are that specific, but these are ideas of what they are. Okay, meeting technologies. Meeting technologies. Here are some ways in which you can use technology to have more effective meetings. Now, of course, ideally, a meeting would be everybody sitting around a conference table. It doesn't always work that way. People are out of town. People may telecommute. You may be dealing with customers who are in different areas. People may not have time to attend an in-person meeting. For whatever reason, there's no reason why every meeting has to be around a table, although, I've had a lot of all kinds, and I'll tell you that, sitting around a table is probably the most effective way to have a meeting, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. You could have teleconference, you could have webinars. These are all things that are certainly important and adequate and realistic ways to conduct meetings. Virtual meetings require a little extra planning. I said before that having papers that are the agenda of the meeting are important for all meetings, but they're especially important for virtual meetings, for webinars or for teleconferences. If it's just an open meeting and you have 6 people on the phone and you don't have any structure, it's not gonna work. Well, you really need to have an agenda. When I have a web-based meeting, like through Adobe Connect or GoToMeeting or WebEx or whatever it is, I usually like to have a PowerPoint presentation to keep the participants engaged, because if there's nothing on the screen and the participants don't know what's being discussed, their attention is going to wander. What I said before about silencing your phone during meetings, when people are in virtual meetings, they don't silence their phones. And if you're just talking randomly and the people don't know what you're referring to or why you're talking about something, they're just going to be on their phones doing other things, and that'll be that. The meeting will be a waste of time. You need to keep participants engaged, and the way to keep participants engaged is to put up agendas or to put up PowerPoints or to put up something on the screen if you have a screen, or at least email people the agenda if it's a teleconference. Or at the very least, state in the meeting, okay, our purposes are going to be X, Y, Z. These are our goal of this meeting: 1 goal, 2 goal, 3 goal, and deal with that. At least you stand a chance, even if it's just an audio teleconference. Okay, ensure the participants are prepared. Again, if possible, send them the agenda beforehand and say, listen, this is what we're going to discuss, and give the participants opportunity to participate. If it's just a speech, might as well just record it and send it to everybody. You want to give a speech? Nothing wrong with that. You can give a speech about a goal and put it up on YouTube or whatever it is and send it out to everybody, and everybody can see it. You don't have to spend everybody's time sitting at the. You don't have to make sure everybody's there at the same time. If it's a meeting, that means you expect the participants to participate. If you don't expect the participants to participate, don't do it as a meeting. Do it as an email or something like that. Okay, again, different types of listening. We've already discussed this a little bit. There's content listening, just for information. There's critical listening to see if you agree with something and to indicate by that. Empathic listening, listening to how the other person feels, how you can make the other person feel better. And active listening, engaging what the other person's saying, asking questions, trying to narrow down what the other person's saying. It doesn't mean that you should do any one of these, but in a meeting, it means that you should really keep an ear out, or keep your mind on trying to do all of them where necessary. If it's somebody complaining, empathic might take first place in what you're doing. If it's an idea somebody's presenting, maybe critical listening might take first place. If it's a sales report, maybe content listening, etc. Okay, this we also discussed before: the listening process, receiving information, interpreting that information, keeping that information in your memory, or at least appropriating it where necessary, evaluating the information. Is the information good information or is it not good information? And of course, responding. Here are some examples of the difference between good listening and bad listening, or effective listening and ineffective listening. Listening actively is better than listening passively. Listening actively means clarifying. Okay, what do you mean by that? What do you expect us to do about that? Whereas listening passively is less effective. Taking notes or appropriating information however you want to do that, putting down information however you want to do that is fine. Stay focused on the speaker and the content. Again, you can look at these charts. It's pretty self-evident. Okay, nonverbal communication is also important. Things like, if it's a teleconference, well, then nonverbal communication is pretty much irrelevant. I guess maybe your tone a little bit, but the rest, if it's an in-person meeting or even a teleconference or even a video conference, these are all things that are important. What's your facial expression? Don't think that people don't pick up on whether you're smiling or frowning or rolling your eyes or winking or anything like that. People pick up on it. People pick up on it probably as much as they pick up what you're saying. Your vocal characteristics. Are you being energetic? Are you being enthusiastic? Or are you being monotonous and just saying the words so that people can assimilate information? Just doing that, saying the words can be effective if all you're doing is trying to tell people things. But then again, if all you're doing is trying to tell people things, a recording or an email probably would have been just effective. Or, or an article. Here, read the article. If you're just being monotonous, then you're probably being an ineffective communicator. Anyway, that's my impersonation of the Borg or Data from Star Trek. Anyway, so where are we? So your personal appearance matters. Certainly, it doesn't mean you have to dress up in a suit and tie or a fancy work dress at every meeting, but it does mean that you should look presentable. And if you're leading a meeting, personally, if I'm leading an important meeting, even if people that are under me in an organization, I wear at least a nice shirt and a tie or something like that, and present yourself as somebody as authority. If nobody in your company ever wears ties, doesn't mean you have to put on a tie, but you shouldn't. I don't think that people who are supervisors should look extremely casual or should look not unput together. I think that detracts from the effectiveness of your authority level. If you want to be the boss, look like the boss and act like the boss. Okay, so that's nonverbal communication. Obviously, these are all things. When you're not talking is also important, because when you're not talking, and you're listening, what's your facial expression? If it's one of boredom, the speaker is going to know that. The speaker is going to realize that. If it's one of interest, the speaker is going to know that too. We probably don't realize the level to which people look at our facial expressions and are able to read our facial expressions. You may think the human face only has a certain number of combinations in terms of how it looks, but there are many different possible expressions. Happiness, sadness, boredom, interest, excitement, lack of excitement can all be conveyed fairly effectively through eye contact or lack thereof. Contempt, people roll their eyes, they don't think anything of it, but if somebody sees you rolling their eyes, it means they now know that you treat what is being said with contempt, and you have contempt for what's being said, and that could that could ruin what's being said. No question about that. Business etiquette, again, that's all the same. It's all basically what we just discussed. Here are some examples. Okay. Using the phones in the workplace. Now, this means speaking to other people in your company, but it also means speaking to suppliers, speaking to other people, speaking to vendors, speaking to customers. All of these things are important. Being courteous, positive professional attitude, ending calls with courtesy and clarity. Rather than just hanging up or saying goodbye, say, okay, so we've established that, we're going to send you this product and we appreciate your business. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. A little bit of courtesy can go a long way. Use your outgoing voicemail messages to help callers. So if you're not in, hi, I'm out from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. on this day. If you have an emergency, please text me on my cell phone. My cell phone number is 12345678890. And just giving people help rather than saying, hi, I'm not available to take your call. Leave a message. You can do that, but it's not going to further the caller's ability to do anything. I mean, I get that all the time, by the way, from callers who call me and say, "Hi, can you call me back?" And then hopefully at least they leave a phone number. If they don't, if they don't leave a phone number, then obviously that's another kettle of fish. But if somebody just says, "Yeah, hi, my name is Jane Smith. Could you call me back? My number is this." To be 100% honest with you, I usually don't call back because when somebody just, in today's day and age, and this is something that's true in business, something that's true in academia and all that, in today's day and age, if you just leave your name and number, the odds are very, very good that you're not going to get a call back, and the reason is very simple. Many calls that people get are from telemarketers or people who have, totally non-important information, and people are busy. And if I called every single person that calls with if every single telemarketer that called me, I gave them a call back, I'd be too busy. I'm too busy for that. And most people are busy. They're busy dealing with things, and especially in today's day and age where you can deal with anything at any time, and there's no real downtime that you have. No matter what time it is, you can always be doing something productive. And if somebody just calls you and you don't know what the phone call is about, it could be about anything. It could be about something important, or it could be about something useless. And if you're a busy business person, you're probably not going to call people back. So when you do call somebody and when you do leave a voicemail, explain what the message is about. Hi, I'm interested in your product. Hi, I'm interested in this, that, and the other thing. And if the person's interested or the person thinks it's worthwhile to call you back, they'll call you back. If the person doesn't think it's worthwhile to call you back, if it's just a random person calling, they're probably not going to call you back. It may seem harsh, but if you just pick up the phone, call a standard business person, and say, "Hi, my name is Jane Smith. Can you please call me back? My number is 12345678890." You're not getting a call back. 80% of the time you're not getting a call back, and again, the reason is because the listener, the person who you called, doesn't know that call is important, or that call is going to benefit them, and they've got other things to do that is going to benefit them. So that's just a word to the wise in general. Whoever you're calling, if it's a stranger, explain to the stranger why it's in their interest to call you back, or why you need a call back, or whatever it is. Just saying, "Please call me back," is just not going to work. Business etiquette. The interesting etiquette in business is a little different than etiquette in personal life. Business etiquette, you're expected to establish certain minimal level of appropriateness and politeness. Introducing yourself, introducing others, observing customs of the individual culture, making sure not to offend people, all very important. Online, again, this doesn't necessarily just mean in random forums online, but it could be in email chains, in anything that has to do with your business. Avoiding personal attacks, staying focused, not presenting your opinions, in fact. This is a bad idea. No, I think it's a bad idea. Or better yet, I think a different idea is a better idea because of XYZ, and explaining why, all very important. Following correct grammar and spelling, I know that's not that common in today's day and age, and a lot of people don't, like to put the number 2 instead of TO, and don't bother with commas, and don't care how their punctuation looks. I can tell you right now, again, I'm putting a lot of personal anecdotes. I've been been in businesses for a few decades, so I know a little bit about this, or at least a couple of decades anyway. I don't want to present present facts that are misleading. When I see an email and the grammar's messed up, and there are periods where there shouldn't be periods, and there are run-on sentences, and there's then instead of than, and there's apostrophes where there shouldn't be apostrophes, and mixed singular and plural, it doesn't mean I won't answer. It doesn't mean I won't get the message, but it does mean that I'll have a little bit less respect for the person that wrote it, and you're much more likely to get a comprehensive, clear, respectful response from me if you write something to me that is properly written. If it's not properly written, I try not to be rude to people, but if it's not properly written, I'm not going to have the same level. I'm not going to think, oh, this is a serious person to be dealt with seriously. I might think this is just a random, not serious person, and I can just kind of brush off this person with a general response. The better the question, the better the answer. I would definitely say that. Okay, use virus protection. Today it's a little bit less. It's important, obviously, not as important as it used to be because computers' standard operating systems are a lot better today at weeding out viruses than they used to be. But in the old days, 15, 20 years ago, you had to have a virus protection software. Your computer was going to be infected constantly. Today, again, it's still important, but things like Microsoft Windows much better at cutting off viruses than they used to be. Use secure passwords. Ask if it's a good time to instant message someone. Instant messaging somebody it's one thing when you're talking about a private message or an email. They can deal with it then. They cannot deal with it. Instant message is something that you expect the person to respond to immediately. Just to instant message somebody out of the blue, it could be perceived as a little disrespectful. You're just interrupting me in the middle of my day and you're expecting me to respond right away. I might be in the middle of something. Can you send an email? Can I instant message you? That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. You send a text. Can I instant message you? Sure. If you instant message somebody random, as a business person in the middle of the day, what you might be interpreted as saying is, I don't think your time is that valuable, and therefore I'm expecting you to drop everything and respond to me now. People don't appreciate when they're instant, especially people that are high-placed or experienced business people. They get instant messaged out of the blue. They may look at it as being a little presumptuous. Avoid multitasking. Again, here we're dealing with people who you don't regularly communicate with. If you're just talking to somebody or IMing with somebody or anything like that, you want to try to focus on what that person is saying and never assume that what you say is between that person unless it's explicitly stated that it is confidential. Don't always use reply all. Sometimes you can, but reply all in a message says that you're replying to everybody on the chain. A supervisor might send out an email to 10 people saying, do this way and that this way. If you want to respond to the supervisor and say, I want to suggest something else, even if it's very respectful, send it directly to the supervisor. Don't send it to everybody. Send it to everybody. You're being a little presumptuous. Who says the supervisor wants your opinion on the matter being disseminated to everybody? It's something to be very careful about. Don't waste people's times with sloppy or confusing messages. Think about your message. I think I mentioned before, and I'll mention many times again, sometimes in an important message, I'll draft it, stick it in my drafts folder, and think about it for a couple of hours or even a day or two before I send it. That's important. You don't want to be confusing. You want to be as clear as possible, especially in email communications. Okay, implement good personal habits, and of course, be aware of expectations and policies. Okay, and we'll see you in Chapter 3.